Hello, I'm John Lithgow. Welcome to American Cinema. At the edge of Hollywood and beyond, new filmmakers are making some of the most interesting films in America today, films that have made Hollywood stand up and watch. These filmmakers work against great odds on shoestring budgets. If they succeed, they can get a chance to make Hollywood pictures, like Quentin Tarantino and Pulp Fiction. But going Hollywood has its price, one that some of these filmmakers won't pay. In this program, narrated by Frances McDormand, we will look at some visions from the edge.
Independent films are the most important things there are in the USA. They're the lifeblood of the filmmaking industry. They set the new standards, and they set the trends, and they have the wildest ideas and the most interesting stories, and they're usually the best of the pictures in the country.
You're not Mr. Purple. Some guy has some other job as Mr. Purple. You're Mr. Pink.
These independent directors have their own vision, and they want to create a movie that reflects their vision. That's the most important thing.
I think we're all a little bit crazy. I think that all of us have been traumatized by something or other, and then we have this need, this obsession to tell stories and to rework the world within our own frame guidelines.
There are certain independent filmmakers who are independent because they cannot make the movies they want to make within the studio system. If the movies work and they make a profit, then the studios are going to be banging on the doors of those independent filmmakers saying, hey, why don't you make a movie for us? You know, I mean, we want that money that you made for those guys or you made for yourself. We want that money. You know?
In mainstream Hollywood, a studio picture averages $42 million in production and marketing. An independent film can cost a fraction of that amount. In order to survive, major studios have to produce films that appeal to a mass audience. But independent filmmakers with lower budgets can take risks that Hollywood won't, producing films that are original and personal. How independent films are made varies, but filmmakers on the edge of Hollywood all have one overriding desire: to make their films on their own terms.
It's very, very difficult for something new to come from within Hollywood. It's almost impossible. I think it has to come from the margins.
Action. Spike Lee.
Made with a final budget of approximately $175,000, She's Gotta Have It, Spike Lee's first feature film, received national attention.
The breadth and scope of the whole thing just seemed like it was a completely new voice, black, white, or any color. And obviously in the world of black film, there hadn't been anything, except for Michael Schultz working from the blaxploitation days, up to Crush Groove, I guess, just around the time that She's Gotta Have It screening occurred. There was nobody else in the black filmmaking community in Hollywood or elsewhere doing anything. So he, it was just, he basically had the field entirely to himself. He invented a field that had disappeared. He reinvented it.
Black Americans have been waiting for a film like this a long time. They never saw black people kissing on the screen or making love. Even the big black stars, Eddie Murphy, Richard Pryor, they don't have none of that stuff in their films.
It seems that men are taught not to be in touch with themselves, with their true feelings, but the things that they do say, weak.
You so fine, baby. I drank a tub of your bath water. I just want to rock your world. Baby, it's got to be you and me.
Please, baby, please, baby, please, baby, 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 please.
His second film, School Days, an ambitious musical about class and social distinction within the African American community, garnered his first studio deal with Columbia Pictures. Spike Lee followed School Daze with Do the Right Thing, Mo Better Blues, and Jungle Fever. Although his budgets escalated, Lee continued to explore the cultural and socio-political diversity of African Americans. His 1989 release, Do the Right Thing, explored racism in a way never before seen in a Hollywood film.
If you lucky a black man has a loving heart, next time you see me coming, man, you go street quick.
I'm out of here.
You been bringing his feet. You little jerk. Take his collar. I should make you buy me another pair. Black Panther, whoop his ass. Take his bike. And you look, I'm a righteous black man, but you be in serious trouble, man. Serious. Fucking Hey, why don't you move back to Massachusetts?
I was born in Brooklyn.
Black people know everything about white people. From the time we can think, that's all we see on TV, that's all on the radio, magazines, movies. We're bombarded with white folks. But conversely, I think white Americans know very little about African Americans.
The beauty for Spike Lee is that he, for a number of years, a number of projects, he was able to structure his productions as negative pickups, which basically meant that he could write the rules, and he would have to agree to only three things. He would have to agree on we'll make the first one, we'll roll three things into the first one. He'd have to agree on the budget, the cast, and he'd write the script and then have to film the script that he wrote. He'd have to deliver a film with only an R rating, and he'd have to make a film that was basically under 120 minutes. He went over 120 minutes on Jungle Fever, but otherwise he kept his end of the bargain, and they totally left him alone.
Put him up myself! Get your hands up! Get your hands up!
On Malcolm X with Warner Brothers, with a lot more money on the line, he still managed to make exactly the movie he's wanted to make, but it's been with a lot, he's had to put up with a lot more resistance along the way. He's had to fight more fights.
You can't get gambling in Harlem without the white man.
Lee's ambitious epic, Malcolm X, cost over $25 million.
I say and I say it again, you've been had. You've been took. You've been hoodwinked. Bamboozled. Led astray. Run amok.
Well, there was a point in the film, after we finished shooting, while we were finishing the film, where the money was cut off. And I wanted to continue working, so I called up Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, Prince, Janet Jackson, Tracy Chapman, Oprah Winfrey, and I just told them the truth, I need money. And they wrote me a check, all of them.
Where can I get a better
1994 signaled a return to smaller budgets with Crooklyn, a film about growing up in Brooklyn in the 1970s.
What we want to do is to elevate black cinema to what we've done in music, in sports, and everything else. Of course, we're not at the level yet because we're in our infancy as far as films go, but another 20 years, we're going to produce our Duke Ellingtons, our Romare Beardens, our James Baldwins, people of that stature in film.
For us in New York at that time in the late 70s, it was an idea kind of related to the music scene at the time, which was that we are not virtuoso filmmakers, but we have something we'd like to express, and that desire to express it was more important than having a kind of more professional attitude or having a lot of experience. When I started thinking about Stranger Than Paradise, there were severe limitations as far as how much money I could get to make a film like that.
The cash cost of Stranger Than Paradise was $160,000, and it grossed many times more than that. Jim's pacing was very slow and deliberate. There was a kind of irony in the way that he approached the world, which was not typical of filmmaking then, a kind of meandering approach that let you decide what you thought was important about the story.
The style of the movie and the sensibility of the movie were clearly emanated from the personality of Jim Jarmusch, but also happened to be perfect for the financial circumstances and constraints under which he had to work. The idea of using characters, actors who were playing characters who were more or less identical to their own, New York street selves. It was just a complete knockout.
After I finished making Stranger Than Paradise, someone from Dino De Laurentiis' office called me and asked me to come and meet with him. And I went into his office, and he had this huge desk, larger than my apartment, it seemed like. And I talked to him for a while. He was very direct, and he said to me, "Why do you make amateur films as opposed to professional films?" And I asked him, what is the difference between an amateur film and a professional film? And he said, a professional film costs at least $5 million. So I still have not yet made a professional film.
Another aspect of his filmmaking, which I think is important and very different from Hollywood, is that he's always developing a character and writing a character with a particular actor in mind. Jim had wanted to make a film with Tom Waits and John Lurie trapped together in a confined space.
Here they come.
And then when he met Roberto, he said, well, I'm going to take a character like Roberto and put that into the same space with him. And then Roberto plays Bob, which is very much Roberto Benigni.
Not you, Shorty. It ain't your turn. Come on. Let's go. What time you go for flower dice? I don't go. I listen to my turn.
Jim Jarmusch might have needed to turn to other money sources like Hollywood if he hadn't been so embraced immediately from Stranger Than Paradise on by the world film community. The fact that Stranger and Down by Law and the movies since were big hits in other countries all over the world, and certainly in France where he's a god, but in other places as well, enabled him to finance his movies offshore. And that makes it a lot easier, I think, for somebody like him not to even have to be tempted to turn to Hollywood.
It's hard to find money in the States without a lot of strings attached because everyone wants to have input into the film, and that's not my style. So I've been lucky to find financing outside the United States. Mystery Train was financed 100% from Japan. It is kind of odd, although I feel like I'm American only kind of coincidentally, you know.
Hi, good night.
Good night. How may I help you?
We would like most cheap room, please. Do you have?
All our rooms for two people are the same rates.
何言ってるかよくわかんない。I'm sorry, that is too expensive.
Jarmusch's relationship with Hollywood becomes almost more and more irrelevant because I think with each picture he makes, Hollywood becomes more and more aware that he's not interested in doing it their way and that what he's doing is just something else and they don't even have to think about him.
Hollywood is not very alluring to me. I'm not susceptible to being lured by swimming pools and Porsches. You know, it's not. I got a 79 Chevy. I mean, it's running good.
Joel and Ethan Coen captured critical acclaim with their debut film Blood Simple, a thriller in the tradition of film noir.
I saw Blood Simple right when it came out, and it just was a startling picture. They shot a scene where they shot bullet holes in this room and these big shafts of light came in. And, you know, I make a lot of these action movies. I said, why didn't I ever think of that? You know, I had plenty of gunshots. I never had shafts of light going through. So I was just very impressed with the first picture, and I thought, these guys are really something.
We were much more involved at a personal level with people who were making sort of low-budget horror movies, exploitation movies, than we were with any kind of sort of avant-garde New York art film scene or anything like that. I mean, we didn't know any of those people, whereas we knew people who were doing exploitation films. I had been working as a assistant editor on a horror movie named Evil Dead, which is how Ethan and I met Sam.
There's some tools that I found to be very helpful on the making of my films that Joel has recognized are good tools, and he's applied them like any craftsman would. them is a shaky cam, which is just a simple 2x4 board and a camera placed in the middle. And then you get an operator on either end of the board. And it acts as a stabilizing element, so it allows you to move the camera around very cheaply and quickly. You can also rush at objects and go over them and come to a quick stop. Joel used that extensively to very good effect.
I remember how I was struck the very first Coen film I saw Blood Simple, about half a year before it went into release. I saw it at a film festival. And it's a terrific genre story. The guy's out on a country road at night, and he's got a shovel, and he's walking along and dragging the shovel on the blacktop road. It's just the kind of noise that a shovel makes, and that sound in that scene, punctuating the emotions, punctuating that event in just that way, was brilliant.
The fact that we storyboard everything we do sort of grows out of our experience in Blood Simple, because we didn't have any money to waste, essentially, and we had to be able to talk to the person who was shooting it and the person who was designing it very specifically about what we were going to see and what we weren't going to see in order not to waste the money that we had.
There's something, probably a lack of heart or emotion in their films that have prevented the mass audience from connecting with their films. There's always a certain distance there. But I think Raising Arizona shows that they could make a kind of middle American comedy that people could really get into.
I'll be taking these Huggies and whatever cash you got.
No, not by the hair on my chinny chin chin, said the little pig. Look at him. Then I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house in. That son of a bitch. You son of a bitch!
Better hurry it up. I'm in Dutch with the wife.
When they plan a picture or a sequence, I find that what they're really doing is not planning a shot and then another shot, but they're really writing a piece of music, only they're doing it visually. And they're very aware of the power or impact of a close-up versus a wide shot versus a dolly shot. And then they're aware of the effect of those shots in sequence, just as a musician would be aware not only of the sound of the single note, but the flow of the notes and how they would rise and build to a climax.
The people writing about the films have seen far more than we have and are much more sort of literate in terms of movies than we have. I mean, we essentially, watch Cornell Wilde movies.
We'll hear from that kid, and I don't mean a postcard. I think there's a lot of Joel and Ethan in there.
Fish, fresh fish.
They're not as much of a pill as Bart and Pincus.
Let's spit on our hands and get to work. It's late, Maury.
Not anymore, Lil. It's early. So we were doing a love scene with Judy Davis, and they had written originally that there wasn't all this kissing, and maybe, I don't think that she ran her hand through her hair, and then they wanted to do it a little bit different. And I didn't want to. I said, listen, guys, I was at Defender Writers here, and they were going like, oh yeah, well the hell are the writers, I said it should be really kind of, but he's like a virgin and everything. And then we came up, and well, how about if, she takes my glasses off? That's like totally undressing me. He looks like a little raccoon, a little scared child. When we saw it in dailies from Ethan, That's really quite romantic, John. As well, film could use a little touch of sensitivity before what's going to happen, you know.
Producer Joel Silver, known for the blockbuster films Lethal Weapon and Beverly Hills Cop, was attracted to their distinctive style.
I'm proud to be involved with Joel and Ethan, but I don't look at it as a kind of a adding to my collection. I mean, I look at it as I hope that I can help them make a great movie, because if it's a great movie, then it'll be good for all of us.
The Hudsucker Proxy is something we started working on several years ago with Sam Raimi, right after Blood Simple, as a matter of fact, and we put that aside for a while. I don't know, it's been intervening 7 or 8 years, because it was becoming clear that it was going to be a very expensive movie and probably not something we could realistically make at all, and certainly not something we could make at that point with the kind of control we wanted.
We were doing a rewrite about 6 months before the production started. Joel turned to me and said, you know, the studio wants us to cast somebody that we're not happy with, and they're not approving our choice, so we're not going to make the movie. So I thought, well, that's fine. Huh? Okay. But they were ready to close down the whole thing because they didn't get, because it wasn't exactly how they had envisioned it.
Well, they told me that and I went crazy. I said, you have to make this movie. You have to make it. You can't not make this movie. The time is right for this movie. It's now. It's the right movie to make for this moment. You got to make it.
It does help to be able to sort of put some teeth into your position by just saying it's take it or leave it, and you're not. And if it's leave it, then so be it, and no hard feelings. But we'll go do something else. That does, I guess, help marginally. But I think it usually boils down to just a question of whether or not you're going to be successful, and that gambit is just a question of how badly they want the material.
They can say, I'll make a little movie instead, because they have that, ability. But I'm glad they're making this one.
Hudsucker Proxy's production costs were about equal to the money made by the most successful independent movie of the 1980s, Steven Soderbergh's Sex, Lies, and Videotape.
Well, I guess it's all downhill from here.
Yeah, I came out of this sort of independent guerrilla background in which things were made very cheaply.
Anne Bishop Mulaney.
So what do you want to talk about?
What do you usually talk about?
Sex, Lies, I think, was a fluke. I think it's being used as a benchmark in a financial sense, and I think that's a mistake. Independent films shouldn't be judged like that. These are films ordinarily that don't cost a lot to make and don't have to make a lot of money.
Steven Soderbergh first drew attention at the Sundance Film Festival, a yearly event held in Park City, Utah. One of the premier festivals for American independent films, Sundance has earned a reputation for showcasing unknown talent and attracting the attention of Hollywood.
I remember sort of seeing Steven Soderbergh around before the screenings of Sex, Lies, and Videotape in Sundance. No one knew who this guy was. I mean, he was having dinner alone.
I just want to ask you a few questions, like why do you tape women talking about sex? Huh?
Suddenly the next day, Redford and Sidney Pollack and Universal, everyone's just calling him up.
I'm just going to keep asking.
I just don't find, the turning the tables thing very interesting.
Why do? Tell me why, Graham. Why?
His life is never going to be the same again. After that one screening, it all changes like that.
A lot of people approached me about doing things at a lot of different places, which was interesting. I chose to make Kafka, which is something I'd read many years ago, and decided I was going to cash in my orange ticket. Kafka just appealed to me because it was different from Sex, Lies, radically different. It would take me out of the country, so I wouldn't have anybody watching me. It could be made independently.
Oh, Kafka!
see you at the cabaret.
I knew it would be a very difficult film physically to make, and I wanted that because Sex Lies, in a sense, had been so easy.
What are you working on?
Oh, a thing about the man who wakes up to find himself transformed into a giant insect.
Its commercial failure was interesting because it almost didn't count. Within the Hollywood community, the people who saw the movie seemed to like it well enough. Certainly they respected the filmmaking. The fact that it was an independent movie almost made it not count as a blemish because it wasn't their money, so they didn't care. Now that it appears that there might be money to be made from independent type films, there's certainly more people who are looking toward that end, not necessarily on the filmmaking side, but on perhaps the distributor side and the producer side, which results in MCA and Polygram forming this new division, Gramercy, to deal with the film I'm making now, King of the Hill, which they think is not necessarily a specialty film, but not necessarily something that should be dumped in 1,200 theaters. They're doing it because they think there is money to be made doing that, and that's why they're doing it. It's not because of some overriding belief in film as art, and that's fine.
You know, ever since Vinny got the VCR, every night he's been bringing home a different dirty video.
In the late 1980s, Nancy Savoca emerged as one of a select few women filmmakers in America to receive national critical acclaim.
Oh my God.
Savoca created true-to-life characterizations of women and Italian Americans seldom seen on the screen.
I mean, they pee through that thing. You know what I mean? So, animals.
The script was written right after I graduated from college, and I just assumed that it would get done right away because I thought it was a great script and I was a great director and we would get it done. And what ended up happening is on graduation, that reality hits really hard about how difficult it is to get something like this off the ground and how much money is needed. So it literally, from the time the script was written until we started shooting, was 6 years.
What happened? Donna, please. We can't help you if you don't tell us. You're gonna help me. Donna, just tell us what happened, please.
You wanted to go out with your friends tonight.
When True Love went at the U.S. Film Festival at Sundance, we got an incredible amount of interest. It was as if we'd been, you bang your head against the wall so many times that suddenly you keep banging your head and the wall's not there anymore. Everything just opened up very quickly. And, we took meetings and were very excited. And, but what was interesting at the end is we found out that in order to get into the filmmaking system, then there are certain things that you need to do, and to this day, I mean, I'm just not sure how much I can make myself fit into the system.
I think devotion to one's family is even more pleasing in the eyes of God.
Nancy Savoca's film Household Saints depicts a young woman's religious journey.
What else?
You don't sit around waiting for miracles, because then you come to expect some big announcement to let you know that a miracle is on its way.
We did go out with the script, but it was rejected basically because it's not a topic that many people want to deal with. And we ended up doing it independently, mainly because we just couldn't find someone who would back it. Independent filmmaking is a really wonderful thing, but the harsh reality of it is that it gives you less money when you're working outside of the studio system, and you suffer for it. And there's a lot of compromising, and you lose a lot of things. But in the end, you gain creative control. At least where I am at this point, it's the only way I can get creative control. So on the one hand, look, if someone's going to give me money, wherever it comes from, I'll take it. But at the same time, I want the creative control, and that's the battle. With Reservoir Dogs,
Quentin Tarantino's use of sharp dialogue and graphic violence created a sensation at the 1992 Cannes, Torino, and Sundance film festivals.
I just didn't think I was ever going to be able to deal my way in. No one's going to say, you know, we're going to take a chance on you, kid. I just never thought that would ever happen. And so out of frustration, I wrote Reservoir Dogs, because I had just sold a script, and I was going to take the money that I used to sell this script, and I was going to make the movie with that. I mean, I was going to shoot Reservoir Dogs for $30,000, 16mm black and white. That's why it all takes place in one room.
I begged him and begged him to let me raise more money, and he refused.
And no, I've heard that before. Forget it. No way. You know, no one's ever going to give me a chance. And no.
And he was saying this to me. I'm like, oh man, but just let me go raise some money, please.
And then finally, after a long time of negotiating, he goes, "Wait, give me 2 months with it. All right, you can wait 3 months to make your whole movie. Give me 2 months with it." I go, "Well, okay, 2 months. All right. In 2 months, we got it going."
I'm gonna die alone. Oh, excuse me, I didn't realize you had a degree in medicine. Are you a doctor? Are you a doctor? Answer me, please. Are you a doctor? Huh? Okay. So you admit you don't know what you're talking about. So, if you're through giving me your amateur opinion, slide back and listen to the news. I'm taking you back to the rendezvous. Joe's gonna get you a doctor. The doctor's gonna fix you up. And
it's the kind of film that Hollywood did not want to make. Quentin was going to give up directing the script because of our difficulty raising the funding. And I urged him to direct it. I wanted him to direct it because in the text, his talent was so vivid to me that I felt he should direct it, and I didn't want to do it unless he directed it.
The way I write, I just get the characters talking. All right, and they just start talking to each other, and I'm like a court reporter, you know, I'm just writing it down, you know, and they just get it going. And so since this was basically, you know, almost like a play as far as the way they dealt with each other, they wrote it. This is the quickest script that I ever wrote. I wrote it in about 3 weeks.
I know what kind of guy you are. I never would have agreed to work with you.
Are you gonna bark all day, little doggy? Or are you gonna bite? What was that? I'm sorry, I didn't catch it. Would you repeat it? Are you going to bark all day, little dog? And I got involved in helping Quentin with the casting, which an actor of my experience should do for a young director, a first-time director. So I read with a lot of people, all that. And then I wanted Quentin to be able to see all the actors he could to make the best choices he could. So there was no money in the budget to finance a trip to New York to see New York actors, so I financed that.
To me, if it was just good acting and it was a clever dialogue and good writing or whatever, it would have been a complete failure if it hadn't worked as far as the film going through the projector was concerned. It's cool because I get to be both actor and director. Actually, I don't like most movies directed by actors. There's no cinema involved there. They're all touchy-feely things. I like cinema. My heroes are like Brian De Palma, Sergio Leone, Mario Bava, Martin Scorsese, Nicholas Ray, people like that. Sam Fuller, cinema guys.
You ever listen to Kay Billy's Super Sounds of the 70s?
Violence in movies doesn't bother me at all. To me, saying you don't like violence in movies is like saying you don't like tap dancing sequences in movies. It's one of the many things you can do in movies, and it's a very cinematic thing, and you may not like it, it might not be your cup of tea, but the fact that you should or should not do it is not up for question. You can do it anyway. I'm so scared, kiss off all of my chair. Then I'm wondering how I get down the stairs. Climb on to the left of me, two girls to the right. Here I am, stuck in the middle with you. Yes, I'm stuck in the middle, and I'm wondering how it is. It's so hard to keep this smile from my face. Losing control, I'm That was one of the only scenes in the movie that I actually shot two ways. I did another shot where the camera was directly behind the cop as Michael straddles him and cuts off the ear. All right, because I wanted to be sure about which way to go. In the rushes, the one where Michael is on top of him and saws it off on screen, that was the powerful one. That was the one we were like, oh, wow, we got to use that one. That's the one. But in the movie, the one where the camera pans away, that was the more powerful one. You could dismiss the other one because of the shocking value of it. You found it was easier to explain it away. The other one, when your imagination takes the trick, is the one that disturbs people. And I wanted it to be disturbing.
Everyone talks about the violent scene in Reservoir Dogs as, oh God, I mean, it's just unbearable. People walk out and so on. When I saw it, women just left in droves at that scene. But it does create a selling point. And I think that something that people perhaps overlook a bit in this kind of rarefied world of American art cinema, independent cinema, is that there still has to be something to sell in them and that's exploitable.
While Tarantino uses the spectacle of violence to propel his story forward, in One False Move, Carl Franklin portrays violence in a different way.
I wanted people to experience a loss of humanity, the invasion of humanity, which is what happens, when somebody dies, somebody who was alive, somebody who had dreams, somebody who had people who loved them is not here anymore. And there are people who mourn that loss, and there is a chunk of humanity that suddenly is gone. And there's a numbing kind of a feeling, you just kind of, it's not an exciting thing when somebody's dead, there's an absence, there's and I wanted to depict that.
Coke in the kitchen, man. Take the money out of Coke.
We shot it wide so you could see the perpetrator, you could see the victim, you could see the response of the perpetrator, you could see the response of the people who cared about the victim, so that all of that was in the frame. I didn't write the script, but if you accept the screenplay, you have to accept your own honest representation of violence, and if it is a horrid one, then you've got to communicate that.
The difference between sort of mindless Hollywood violence and the kind of violence that you occasionally come up against in these independent films, One False Move, maybe Reservoir Dogs, is that those who are putting the artists who are putting these sequences on that make you feel the horror of it and or really make you think about what this means, it can really justify what they're putting on the screen.
We wanted to somehow break the genre. We didn't want it to have a conventional kind of Hollywood crime feeling.
Slow down, Ray. Don't panic.
You recognized me back there, man. I know he did.
If he recognized you, he would have arrested you in the store. He's just looking us over. White boy and a nigger girl in Texas, that's all it is.
The characters weren't all good or all bad. They were flawed.
I'm going to go ahead and pull them on over.
And with that principle kind of established that this was a world where people had good and bad sides, and where evil was not as clearly defined or as simple as it normally is in a Hollywood film, that created a lot of room to interpret and to do a lot of human inner character work.
You want some rice?
Yes, ma'am.
The fact that race was not the foremost issue in the film was in the writing. But it also coincided with my own view of the racial problems that we have in the world.
What the hell, he does show his honey up there, because I got news for you. That piece of white trash and them two niggers are in. Ow! That's dirt, Shirley. I usually broke my leg. Bonnie, pass me them pickles, will you?
Most of the time, people don't call me names or, confront me, people who are racist. But they'll do other things. And it's the same thing in One False Move. Pluto's not going to say, hey, I don't like the relationship between you and Ray to Fantasia. But you'll see it in his responses and in his looks.
You know, we can buy all the blow we want to when we get there. We'll be safe. Pluto will take care of us. We'll be safe, baby.
I have had several offers from studios wanting me to do things that are very Hollywood and really slick, and it somehow, it escapes me as to why they've come to me. I don't know what they saw in the movie that would make them think that I can do, those kinds of films, or that I would want to do those kinds of films.
Daughters of the Dust is a film that's based upon the African deities, West African deities. So the structure unravels and the story reveals itself in a very West African way, in the way in which an African griot would recount and recall and retell his family's history. I was trying to shoot in tableaus that people would remember, to redefine how we see African Americans, specifically African American women, in historical drama.
When I was a child, my mother cut this from her hair before she was sold away from me. Now, I am my own hair. There must be a bond.
I wrote the script to Daughters of the Dust while I was a student at the American Film Institute, and they marked a big no across it. And years later, after I had done Illusions, I started pitching this story to studio executives, because they kept saying, oh, well, we're really interested in seeing how independent filmmakers just make these films on such low budgets, So I pitched Daughters of the Dust, and they said, oh, is it like Sounder? Is it like anything? Is it like The Color Purple? And I said, no, it's something we've never seen before. And they kind of balked, because one of them even told me, well, we don't do anything that we've never seen before.
If your film is something like Daughters of the Dust, which is a very particular, special kind of film, that's the kind of film that should be made outside the system. Because as soon as Hollywood gets involved, they're going to want more of a story, they're going to want name actors, they're going to want some kind of a really strong narrative, and obviously that's not the kind of film that she was interested in making.
When I'm pitching a story to a Hollywood executive, it's usually a male, and men tend to want to see and hear stories about male dramas and coming-of-age stories of young boys. I think a lot of the films that we've seen recently from African-American male directors are doing well because these executives were able to role-play when they read the stories. And it's kind of like National Geographic, I believe, to certain people. And they're able to watch these films and role play for 2 hours and then walk out of the theater and feel safe because they know, like, phew, that wasn't my life.
I never had too much trouble making a dollar. Never need nobody help me do that. I can't stand still. Got to keep.
When I pitch stories to them, I'm pitching stories about African American women. So I'm asking these executives to extend themselves for 2 hours to look at stories about African American women who are not victims, who are just living their lives, who are facing pivotal moments in their lives. And usually they disengage from the stories, they disengage from the pitch. And I really believe it's simply because they're not interested. This is not what titillates them. They do not want to extend themselves into being an African American woman for 2 hours. They really want to extend themselves into being a white woman for 2 hours. That's why it's very difficult for women filmmakers in general to get stories about themselves on the screen.
Independent films often need specialized marketing. Daughters of the Dust made Variety's top-grossing film list and remained there for over 30 weeks, using an innovative grassroots marketing strategy developed by KJM3, a company run by African American film professionals. Their approach included direct distribution of flyers to local neighborhoods and asking ministers to mention the film in their sermons. Laws of Gravity, directed by Nick Gomez, illustrates how many filmmakers faced with low budgets turn a lack of money into a creative challenge.
The kind of films that I want to make are films that speak honestly about, the people that live in this country. Maybe with a point of view, maybe even a little bit of a bite.
We all worked out of our apartments about a year and a half ago, and it gets to be a hassle working out of your apartment. There's no separation between work and life. So we decided to create a place for people with not a lot of money. The shooting gallery is a home for independent filmmaking, and we have 2 floors here, about 10,000 square feet of anything you could possibly think of that has to do with making films. You could shoot here for a couple $100 a day, rehearse, cast, and have somewhat of a more professional atmosphere than casting out of your apartment in the living room, and at the same time not spending a tremendous amount of money and keeping that money for the production of the project you're working on.
You just got to get up off your ass and get the film stock and borrow a camera and go out there and shoot it, as opposed to sitting around and planning and submitting, which is what we had done for some time, trying to raise funding through the powers that be. Well, the film that we made cost $35,000, so there isn't a lot of precedence for that. So what we were trying to do was create our own model and let everybody else follow suit. The economics of the characters and the geography of the film match the economics of the making of the movie. It's very easy, especially if you're shooting a lot of handheld stuff, to sort of just say, well, let's just sit down and put the camera on a tripod or whatever. Let's just relax for a minute. And it's sort of what, when the cameraman looks up to you exhausted, sweat pouring down his face with this Aton on his shoulder. It's like, you kind of like, but you just have to sort of keep on pushing everybody to try to maintain a certain kind of level. We create a live situation, and then the cameraman gets it. So it's an intact moment from the beginning to end. And that's a great way to work. Instead of breaking a scene down and stopping and getting the reaction shot and blah, 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 the whole thing happened right there live, and the whole scene unfold, from beginning to end.
Where are you taking him?
If I didn't have these guys, I would be, if I would just sort of like came in and had directed this movie and then was kind of like at sea, I'd probably end up going out to Hollywood and kind of like kicking around waiting for whatever work, the phone to ring or, whatever to happen to me. But because we have this good little group here, we were able to approach things in a clear-eyed and responsible way and just continue to make films the way that we want to make them and stuff.
Of course, we don't want to keep making movies for $35,000 because we like to pay our crews and, be able to feed them a little bit better and things like that. But, we're not that interested in making $40 million movies.
I think what's particularly exciting about American independent cinema right now is that it's giving a platform for many, many new voices from America, from many different parts of the culture. And I think that that's going to force, actually, eventually, Hollywood films to reflect more of the face of America and the changing population and the changing artistic voices that are around.
In Swoon, director Tom Kalin reinterpreted the scandalous 1920s Chicago trial of Nathan Leopold and Richard Loeb, 2 lovers accused of murdering a young boy. Rather than obscure the homosexuality of the 2 characters, Kalin took a different route.
At the heart of Swoon, I think, and it's one of the things that makes many audiences maybe disturbed by the film, is a kind of unrepentant quality to it, or a refusal to moralize. Swoon doesn't have as its core desire to either locate Leopold and Loeb as victims or as heroes. Swoon really tries to tell the film from inside the relationship, the chaotic, contradictory, complex relationship of Leopold and Loeb, so that in a certain degree you are made to participate. I'm not peddling family values in Swoon, for instance. I'm peddling values that are much more complicated, that ask you to, ask questions about, for instance, the ideology of the family, or sexual roles, or racial roles, or various, positions in society. And I think at the heart, a lot of movies in Hollywood do have an extremely strong and very unself-critical promotion of, family values, etc. And I think Swoon wants to interrupt that. Recognize that the audience is more complicated and diverse than it's been constituted by, mainstream films.
Using sort of new queer cinema as a banner with which to market films has its pluses, obviously, because films get more press, because you have a movement. But on the other hand, I think it's a great disservice to a film like Swoon, which I think certainly transcends issues of sexuality and gender into much broader, stronger ideas of desire and passion.
Where was I? You were discussing Dickie and Babe's pathology. Your Honor, if the defense is proposing that these bloodless murderers are insane.
I don't think either of us are saying, there's absolutely no way we'd ever work within a Hollywood system or whatever. But I do think there's certain fundamental things. I mean, ultimately, the things that make our films interesting are exactly the things often that those kinds of systems would strip away, like choice of cast, like final cut, and like the chance to really be innovative, take chances on people and on structure and on form. So once those things are gone, then who does it really matter who's making the film?
With The Living End, a road movie about two men infected with HIV, Gregg Araki added another voice to queer cinema.
Where's the party, animal? The world is ours.
So, figure this. There's thousands, maybe millions of us walking around with this thing inside of us, this time bomb ticking, making our futures finite. Suddenly I realized, we got nothing to lose.
I went to USC Film School, and being at a really industry-oriented school really sort of pushed me more towards sort of the independent, kind of underground edge, and that I knew my films were, just in terms of content and form, a little bit too weird or esoteric or artsy for mainstream taste.
Now don't kill him until I get back. And no more flirting.
She shouldn't go out there alone. There's snakes in those bushes.
Frank can take care of herself. You better believe it.
Oopsie.
Snakes.
I really wanted the film to be as, sort of weird and as radical and as, just sort of bold and out there as it possibly could. And I think that the difference is, in, say, a Hollywood film, they very much want to do sort of the opposite, and they sort of want to rein you in and, don't make it, too weird or don't offend that part of the audience.
Ow, fuck. You really want to go back to your I'm HIV positive and everything's normal hunky-dory life? Well, go fucking right ahead. Just don't forget to have sex in a plastic bag and don't plan anything too far in the future.
The best thing about being an independent filmmaker is you have what's called the freedom of the underground, that you can do things, you can say things, you can try things that Hollywood films can't.
I think he's going to keep doing that. I think that's what he wants to do. I think that to use somewhat better actors, the budget may go from $25,000 to $500,000, same with 35 millimeter, shooting. But this last film was mixed on a Macintosh computer, for almost nothing. And as the technology changes, it's going to be easier and easier to make these very cheap films for someone like Gregg, who's got that much talent.
If you're determined to make a film now, I'm convinced that you can find a way to make it. Whether you shoot it on video and get it transferred, or you get everyone and all the equipment for free, or you save up for 2 or 3 years, all those ways now are possible, whereas before it was completely out of the question.
I think I'll always be a guerrilla filmmaker. At one point, one critic called us outlaws. And so, yes, I'm a film outlaw. And I think that's a good thing to be.
Major funding for this series has been provided by the Annenberg CPB Project, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and the National Endowment for the Arts, with additional funding from these foundations and individuals, and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the annual financial support of viewers like you.